Okay, welcome everybody to the Comics Fu Show. I'm one of the co-hosts, Kurtis Fujita. I'm a Kung Fu instructor. And an artist, the creative director at Silverline Comics. And my upcoming comic book is called Shadow Ghost. It's the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. So I'm going to hand the baton over to my co-host, Patrick Lugo. Patrick, if you could please share with everybody some information about yourself.
I'm Patrick, art director for Kung Fu Tai Chi magazine. I'm also an author and comic creator. My forthcoming comic book is A Tiger's Tale. Picture the Jungle Book meets the Tao Te Ching, coming to Kickstarter Chinese New Year, February 1st, 2022.
And so for everybody watching this for the first time, our show, if you haven't caught it from the namesake, is all about comic books, kung fu, animation, manga, anime, and anything and everything in between. And so our special guest tonight falls perfectly within that category. He's a dedicated martial artist, having done martial arts for over 2 decades. Additionally, he's the CEO, CCO, and a founder of Powerhouse Animation, and that's the company that brought you shows like Castlevania, Masters of the Universe Revelation, Seis Manos, Blood of Zeus, and just to name a few. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Brad Graeber. Welcome, Brad.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're very excited to be here. Definitely. Now, so we figured we'd just talk to you because you, like I said, you fall perfectly within that context of everything that we love in the show. So, one thing I was thinking before we were going to start was, animation and martial arts, in particular Kung Fu, but martial arts in general, that's not something that you just fall into. You don't go down to the local community college. Those are very specific paths that you have to pick and then seek out. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about that first. First of all, did one come before the other, the animation and art and then Kung Fu, or at the same time? Maybe you could share with us a little bit about how your journey went.
Yeah, for sure. The animation and art came first. When I was, I think, in 3rd grade, I saw a PBS special about Chuck Jones, and immediately just, didn't understand it, but fell in love with the idea of being able to create characters and worlds and all of that other sort of stuff. And it was around the time we had that first "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Sort of project at school. And my parents still have it somewhere, but I said I wanted to be a cartoon animator when I was about in 3rd grade. And I'm a stubborn person, so because of that, I never changed from 3rd grade wanting to do that. My brother was an artist, my older brother, and he was taking art lessons, and I kind of followed what he was doing. But just my whole life, it's what I wanted to do. I'm one of those people who actually can't picture things terribly well in their head. So being able to put it down and watch it and see it move and grow and all of that other sort of stuff really was just something that was inspirational, And so it's been something I've wanted to do my entire life. I started doing martial arts later, probably about 5th or 6th grade. And kind of have had a bizarre journey throughout all of that, like I think most of us have, and then had a break from it, and then found it back after I started working in animation again.
Excellent. And for those of you that don't know Powerhouse Animation, and you should if you watch Netflix or anything else, there's a very distinct inspiration that's drawn from anime and manga stylistically in a lot of the shows. So you started with Chuck Jones, but It's very obvious that there's an anime influence. How and when did that kind of the confluence happen there?
Yeah, that's all thanks to our employees. So I'm 46, and I saw Battle of the Planets and stuff like that when I was younger. And we played that a lot. You know, there was the Thundercats intro and the intro to other shows, but you know, those shows weren't so great episode to episode. They just had these really amazing introductions, right? That were done in Japan. So when we started Powerhouse, it was in 2001. And we were actually trying to be a feature film service studio. Like that was something that was still done at the time. You know, we were still drawing on paper, still, you know, at desks with lights and pencils at that time. And that's what we set out to do. Both of the partners that I founded Powerhouse with were former Don Bluth animators. Oh, wow. So they worked on like Anastasia and Titan AE and Troll in Central Park and Thumbelina and all those sorts of things. And in one of those like bad luck, good luck sort of things, it worked out okay in the end, but at the time was really tough. You know, we decided to start this feature film service studio right when they stopped making feature films. Like we worked on Adam Sandler's 8 Crazy Nights. Wow. And then that was for a long period of time until, you know, Frog Prince came back out. There wasn't a lot of feature films being made. So we moved to doing TV work, but that dried up a lot too during that time period. We worked on The Proud Family and a few other things for Disney. And again, this was back when it was all on paper. We would animate it on paper, put it into FedEx boxes and ship it off. Like it wasn't digital at the time. And so being in Austin, the only real work that we could find was working in video games. And so as the studio grew, we were working with companies like Sony online. We worked on the DC Universe games, worked with BioWare a little bit. We worked with you know, some Disney game companies, and that attracted a lot of young people. And these younger people came in and were showing us all of this anime stuff. And being like half feature animators and half these younger people who were extremely talented, who grew up on anime, it kind of made a unique studio because, you know, feature animators are very high finesse and really wanted to do this, you know, beautiful animation, you know, above limited animation, which is usually reserved for TV back then. And then these young people who wanted to do this incredible, you know, art that was driven by anime. And that kind of created a unique studio. And then the fact that we were working for video game companies made us even more unique because we were so driven by action. You know, most domestic US animation studios are working on primetime adult comedy stuff and, you know, or kids stuff. And because of that, that really made a very different kind of animation studio in the States, especially at that time.
I was just going to say that action is definitely something that I associate with Powerhouse. Just looking at, you know, what you've done, and then just some of the things that you say about, like, if you're going to be in this studio, you must be able to choreograph a fight scene, you know. And so let me ask, like, where was that line? Like, you know, oh, let me put it this way: at what point did you encounter Fist of the North Star?
Well, that was actually, I was in the. I think it was ADV Film was recording some Fist of the North Star stuff. And we went in there for a meeting and somebody didn't show up to do some voice acting. And so they were like, hey, would any of y'all mind popping into the booth? Like we need a whole bunch of efforts and some other stuff. And so I popped into a booth and recorded it and then forgot everything about it. You know, like I was focused on what was happening in the other meeting, you know, whatever we were pitching at the time. And then like a few years later, I looked at my IMDb and I was like, oh yeah, I guess, you know, I was a voice on Fist of the North Star. You know, I think I screamed a lot and did a whole bunch of little things like that. But it was one of those completely happenstance stuff. I just talking about anime in general, I didn't see Akira until I was in graduate school. Like, you know, most of the stuff that I was watching and used to was, you know, more things like the Looney Tunes and domestic feature films. But once I saw it, it was like, oh my God, people are doing this. This is amazing. And then, from there went on to watch FLCL and a whole bunch of stuff religiously. So like I would sometimes, and back then in animation, there was kind of like, you have arguments like 2D versus 3D and anime versus whatever. I've never been that kind of person, and just amazed by everything that was being done over there. So I fell in love with it very quickly.
That's, I didn't even think that I would ask you that question, and I'm just so thrilled at that. It's amazing. But I kind of had the sense that
there's a good
connection. Just
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and again, like we have some amazing animators. Sam Dietz, who does the Castlevania series, who directs it, and then there's all kinds of different people at Powerhouse. I could go on forever. Another guy is Patrick Stannard, who worked on the He-Man show. They just have this amazing sense of action where they are able to, picture it, put it down, and put it out there. And again, I've never been that kind of person. So like I have to think about things in order in a very specific step. And I think that's what eventually drew me back to doing martial arts, because I wanted to recapture all of that so that it could end up going into the thought process, both for directing and animation.
I would imagine that there was a connection. Like what style of martial art did you start? Like was pre-break? Because I'm sure that must have influenced some of your sensibilities, and then post-break. Was it the same art? Did you shift?
No, I was, okay. That's the best way to put it. I also came up around the Shaw Brothers films quite a bit. I'm the youngest of 11 cousins until my little brother was born, and all of them male except for one. And so we would all get together at my grandparents' place on the weekends from time to time, and we would watch Kung Fu theater on UHF in the afternoons. And so like I always loved those specific films and remember them to this day, and us being out in the pasture playing like we were doing 36 chamber Shaolin together or whatever it was. And so like those films influenced me a lot, and I always wanted to find real Kung Fu. Unfortunately, and we could keep talking about this, my Kung Fu journey is similar to a lot of other people's, where I kind of was in one of those McDojo bullshido kind of initial programs. My first foray into martial arts was at a school that taught Chung Mu Do, which was in the Tomball area of Houston. And so unfortunately, that school got closed down. I think a lot of the founders got put in jail and a bunch of other stuff. It was a little bit of a made up martial art, you know what I mean? Image of students and whatnot. So like, but it's still, practicing kicks is practicing kicks. I was in good shape and I really enjoyed doing it, but the schools closed down while I was there. And so it was a weird experience. And so I wanted to find real Kung Fu, right? And that stuck with me from the films and all of that other sort of stuff. And then, so when we started Powerhouse, I had been through grad school, been sitting and drawing, eating too much, all of that other sort of stuff. I was like, well, I was in shape when I did martial arts, so maybe I could find that again. And so I toured a whole bunch of schools in Austin until I landed at the USA Kung Fu Academy that Jeff Hughes ran, and he's a student of my Qigong, and it was legit. It felt legit, and I was very, very lucky to find it.
That's great. I think what you said, a lot of people start on that route, right?
Yeah.
And myself included, I won't necessarily say where I started out martial arts, but I found myself to, similar lineage as you with Hongga, in San Francisco, Chinatown, and all that. And it's like, I'm always feel blessed because some people go their whole lives and will stay in that section of martial arts, and not know what's legit, what isn't. And God bless them, they work as hard as they can, they're dedicated and all that, but I don't know if it's fate, if it's luck, if it's a little bit of both. But when you see the real stuff,
Yeah.
you can't go back.
No.
And you're part of a very small community. I mean, all of us, especially in America, we all know somebody. It's like a Facebook friends list we were talking about earlier. We were saying, Lily Lau is I think in all of our friends list, right? And that's people that's like a pillar of the community. That's as good as they come, right? So
right. Yeah, no, and she's amazing. And the Eagle Claw stuff, it's the same sort of thing. Once you know it and you see it, it's hard to understand like how you were even in these other places. But at the same time, it's, let me put it this way. I remember my first weekend at this school, they just taught like me 8 stances, through the 8 stances. And I must have done them one day for like hours and hours and hours, and I was broken down and just sore as hell and like, what am I doing? This makes no sense. And then you have that like Daniel song moment where you're like, somebody shows you why you did that and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And like it you can't get enough of it after that. It's so much fun.
Definitely. And I think painstaking, right? Describes both dedications, animation, especially hand-drawn animation, and Kung Fu. I mean, do you find in your career in both fields, do you feel that there's a lot of crossover or a lot of connection or with how you handle both? Because you excel.
Yeah. Well, it's all practice, right? It's the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, right? It's, drawing, whether you're doing it for fine art or animation, it's one of those things that you have to get that doing, not doing kind of the brain shuts off and everything just happens automatically. It's a very similar process because animation, it's just so incredibly complex. 2D animation, I mean, it's why you get addicted to it and can't leave. It's you have a blank sheet of paper, and not only are you drawing, but you're drawing at 24ths of a second to imbue something with movement. You have to make it believable to where somebody thinks these drawings are alive and have a personality and a character and all that. And then you add the complexities of the worlds and the stories and the backgrounds and everything that gets put into it. It's just, there's just so much finesse in every part of the process. And it is that you get addicted to that sense of, your brain shutting off, like the feeling of driving, and like just things moving forward because you practice it so much. And, that is Kung Fu, Kung Fu is being good at something via practice. So once you have a taste of that, it's really just, it's hard to want to do anything else. In martial arts and animation, have not just in the sense of practice a lot of similarities, but just nuance of motion, nuance of movement, where the weight is, what is creating the force. Those sorts of things go back and forth between the two. And it's why I think there's so many martial artists in animation, is because it's a very similar topic.
Definitely. The stances are the key poses, right? I mean, that's why the stances are so important,
Yeah. Now, I wrote a fight choreography deck for Seis Manos, and like you almost had to, explaining it to animators, it's easier than explaining it to most people, but you have to teach it almost the way that you teach Kung Fu. You start them with the stances and you're like, they should always land in one of these at the end. And then like the hand follows that. And then you kind of like explain it out that way. And so like it's so similar.
I was just before we were on, I had it on the projector, Seis Manos, and we were at the scene with they're doing Chisao. And I was just loving that. And I was just thinking of like one of the perks of working for Kung Fu Magazine is just being thrown in the deep end of a pool with, the latest Kung Fu master. Like when I first started the job, I got to do a photo shoot with Chen Chao Wang, the master of Chen Tai Chi, and he's trying to explain Fajing to us. And this is through a translator, because I'm going to be in charge of laying that out as a magazine article. How do how do you do that, on a photo spread? And so he ends up saying, come here, let me show you, And I was younger and more fit. So he's like, give me an arm lock. And I'm like, get it all, And then he's just like, 1 second he's water. And then the next second it's just like getting hit by a branch, He's being tossed this,
Yeah.
So I had that in mind while I was laying out the article, but it always kind of stayed with me when, like, years later, I'm trying to draw a comic. And this is something Kurtis and I talk about, is how do you convey those subtleties, in a panel to panel sequence.
Yeah, no, and it is really, really difficult. I mean, it's easier in animation because you actually have time to be, time the state, not the amount of time, but like you're able to work things over time. So you can do the pencil tests and see how everything's working out. But yeah, it's so difficult because it's these little nuances, these little things that almost take these aphorisms to explain, right? Like you almost, I don't know if you've seen the comic panels that are like the guy goes up to the teacher and is like, I'm just having real trouble learning this Kung Fu thing. And he's like, yeah, because you're using the wrong part of your brain. You need to use the part of your brain that isn't thinking as opposed to the one that is thinking. He's like, can you say that in a more esoteric way? He's like, yeah, do the not doing of doing or something like that. He's like, oh, thank you so much, Sifu, I understand, but that's there's a lot of that in there. And it always amazes me. We have so many young animators that just have an innate sense. It's all via practice. It's not a talent, but they just have this innate sense of movement and body mechanics that you're unsure. You'll show them something like there's this one bit in Seis Manos where he does the classic whirlwind mantis thing, and I remember explaining it and like, oh, that's something that's nobody's ever going to get, and then it's in the show and I'm like, yep, that's exactly right. Like they they know how to make that work.
Definitely.
You must have been so proud to
I know, right? Oh, it was so much fun.
Well, I have to compliment, and I hope I'm not saying this to make Brad self-conscious, but Kung Fu is who you are, right? And it's ingrained in him. And for those of you watching, even before he described this movement, right, from Mantis, while Brad was talking, he actually demonstrated several hand postures related to Kung Fu. He was doing this, which is from Fu Hawk.
Yeah.
He was doing this, which is the crane's beak. I saw a grip like this somewhere in there. And that's the beauty of it. Once it's part of you. Somebody asked the Kung Fu guy directions to the story. He's like, okay, well, you make a right turn on, North Broadway, then go to the left here, and then you're going to go around the right. Help it. It's part of who you are, right? I mean, that's just, it's fascinating. When I'm watching Brad talk, I'm like, oh, he knows his stuff because it's who he is, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah. It gets totally ingrained in your body. Like I notice even like when I turn around, because my son's, he's 8 now, and so like he's experimenting with like trying to sneak attack daddy or trying to run and like slap me on the butt or whatever. And like I noticed like I'm always on around him, right? And because of that, if he was running up to me, my hand automatically goes like down and around just in case. And so he must think I'm the weirdest dad ever because it's just part of the natural movement. It's because I'm not thinking about it. It gets ingrained in you through the forms and everything else that you do. And so, it just becomes a part of your natural state. And it's one of the biggest blessings of my life is discovering it, because it just changes everything about you and the way that you think in so many wonderful ways.
Definitely. I always say to my students, it's like with Kung Fu, everybody wants to know practicality, right? Can I use this final? And I always say, you need a martial art that's good for self-defense if you need to defend your life. Absolutely, without a doubt. But how many fights are you getting into every day? If you're a grown-up adult, hopefully not many, So you have to have a martial art that enhances your life, that makes you a better person, that gives you something, so you have a life worth defending when it comes time to defend it, right? And what I find interesting is, if I understand correctly, you've done different martial arts, and I have to ask, I saw a picture of you with Vanderlei Silva, who's I think one of the scariest guys ever.
For sure.
And so I said, this isn't even for the show. This is for me personally. You gotta tell me what that's about. I gotta hear about Vanderlei Silva. So
let me see if I could get us there in the proper way to talk about what you just talked about.
Yeah,
so
sure.
like, I think the early 2000s were that very unique time in martial arts where, because of MMA coming to, its full popularity, and, it was the intersection of MMA making everybody kind of question what they were doing, is what I'm doing real? And then, kind of like the rise of toxic masculinity around that sort of time too, was hitting everybody a little bit. And then you just had this kind of sense of okay, what does it mean? It's kind of breaking it all down. And so I became one of those weekend warrior types, right? So I would go on vacation and would spend a week at American Top Team, or I would go out to Vegas and spend a week at Wanderlei's gym, or I would everything became about martial arts. I did a lot of boxing in Austin. There was this great gym, unfortunately it's no longer around, called Bruce's KO Boxing. And I did boxing there. And then, strangely enough, I worked on an IFL game. I don't know if y'all remember the IFL, but there was this team-based MMA league. They had the Silverbacks, Pat Militich's team, and all these different teams. And we worked on a video game for them because the company was owned by the Seamus brothers, who did Wizard Magazine, which is, was the key comics magazine. And I could tell stories about that too, because Powerhouse used to participate in their contests and things like that. But we ended up doing a video game, and it was, you played as either Pat or Henzo Gracie. And so it was like a Street Fighter type game. And so anyway, even I saw teachers also kind of questioning themselves, maybe we do need to get jujitsu involved in our program. We need more kickboxing, all of that other sort of stuff. And I ended up at this gym in Austin it was called CTC, and it was a Pat Militich affiliated gym. And we did, Kamal Shalarus, who's a UFC fighter, was there. Jens Pulver trained there for a little while, Ben Rothwell. And so, went through that whole system, but it's never who I really was. You know what I mean? And so and Wanderlei actually is how I kind of learned that. So I'll explain. That I've always felt there's a difference between regular athletes and then professional athletes, right? There's always this big jump, right? I remember working with Wanderlei he was going to do a seminar, and we were going to go to the seminar. And so we practiced pummeling, and I was going to demo pummeling with Wanderlei. And I remember my hand hit the back of his neck, and it just felt like rebar. It didn't feel like human flesh or human muscle, right? It felt like rebar. And that little reptile part of my brain that's fight or flight was you need to run right now. It was an immediate, immediate reaction. My hand hit the back of his neck, and I was like, what am I doing here? And so we would pummel, and I was like, this man is going to kill me. I see why they call him the axe murderer now, and he was the nicest person in the world, but you could just feel it. You had that sense, when you're this is not somebody you should be physically grappling with. You are out of your league, you need to run. And it was, same thing happened. I was visiting American Top Team in Florida. And we were running through punching drills, and they had a lingo at that gym that I didn't know. And so we were running through, combos, and they would be like, all right, 1, 2, Fat Joe something. And I'm sitting here like going with this guy, and I'm like, Fat Joe? What does Fat Joe mean? And then next thing I know, I got cracked in the face. And I was like, okay, good, and like trying to see what everybody else was doing. But Fat Joe was a rapper who at that time had a song called Lean Back. And so like it was 1, 2, lean back, and then and so I wasn't dodging, and that's why I got cracked in the face. But I did learn a lot about martial arts. I did learn a lot about everything, but I learned a lot about myself through that too. And like you're saying, it wasn't ever the aggression or the trying to prove that I was better that attracted me to martial arts in the first place. It was the movement. It was the practice. It was the getting that into your body that really was something that attracted me in the first place. And I'm lucky enough to have gone through that. And then, when I hit 40, it was like, okay, let's concentrate on the forms. Let's concentrate on Kung Fu. Let's still play Chi Sao. Let's still spar. Let's do all that stuff. But like, what are you trying to prove? And so like, I came back just to doing Kung Fu.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Patrick, please, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that story reminds me, just brings to mind Dune and the whole putting the hand in the box, Do you run? Do you do yourself,
Yeah, no, it was, I can't, it's hard to even describe, but the whole time you're like trying to look good and tough, but the whole time my brain was just like, get out, get out, get out, get out, run.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I was working at a gym, and some guy saw me in the bag, and he says, hey, I train with Boss Rutan. You may want to come down. They're looking for instructors. And he says, you teach Kung Fu. So I went down there, and I walked in, and I'd never been in an MMA gym, and it's just like, oh, these are the jocks from high school that used to beat us up. Like, it's a completely different vibe,
Yeah.
And when I walked in and said I was there to apply for instructor position, they had this confused look, like either this guy is absolutely insane, or he's really dangerous, and we don't know which it is. But he's an odd bird, Yeah. And it's just a different vibe,
Yeah.
And
it's a different vibe.
Very, very different vibe, and nothing wrong with it, nothing.
No, I've got nothing against it, and like I said, I learned so much, but it's just not why I was doing it. And I can't even believe I'm telling this story too, but how everybody gets cool, tough nicknames in MMA. So when I was training at the Militich gym, there were a lot of good kickboxers there, and I was taught to check kicks with my shin, right? I lift the leg up and check it before it comes out all the way. But these guys could kick and kick very well. And so my nickname at CTC was Butter Shins, because my legs were always brown and blue from having checked kicks all the time, and just not, it's still having enough blood vessels in there to still show it. So like, I knew then it was like, you can't be a real MMA fighter, and it's like, Kurtis, the Pitbull Fujita versus Brad Buttershins Graeber. Just didn't have the right kind of ring to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to work on your branding, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I'll admit I'd be something the legless at that point.
Now, speaking of bruises, this is my attempt at a segue. Speaking of bruises,
okay.
we had interviewed. I had interviewed both you and Sifu Leverett for the article for Seis Manos, and I still remember one of the things that I thought was so fascinating was how much Easter eggs there were for people who really love Kung Fu and know Kung Fu. And I remember you had sent me some concept art of this case, and there was Dit Da Jiao, just tons of Dit Da Jiao. And for the people that don't know what Dit Da Jiao is, it's a bruising liniment. It basically helps heal your bruises, and it's part of the traditional Kung Fu training, And it was just so. Did you find it as a balancing act, right? It's one thing, you'll hear people go to do a project or something like that. They'll spend a week doing martial arts or some reference,
Yeah.
Being a Kung Fu person, tried and true. Did you have to dial that back or manage your expectations when conveying that in a narrative? Was there a balancing act there, or did it just come natural? How was that on Seis Manos?
Yeah, it is like really tough, like to not want to make it just solid kung fu stuff, and that, you know, a general audience isn't going to be able to relate to. And luckily, I worked with two other writers, Daniel Dominguez and Alvaro Rodriguez, on the show. Alvaro co-created it with me. He's the guy that wrote Machete, and an amazing writer. And we did, I think, a really good job of holding each other back in certain ways. Like, you know, they would write action into the scripts and I'd be like, that's not how that would go. Like, she would do this and then she would do that. And then, like, if he's coming from that direction, that's not going to happen. Like, that would be a totally dumb way to do that. And they were very great about that. They would be like, just like Brad, and sometimes Daniel would put the fight stuff here. And then, like, I would come back in and we would add the fight stuff. But you know, my inclination is like, we got to have Zhao, we got to have this, we got to have that, like, and like there should be an iron arm thing over here, and there should be this, like, all these training equipment. And they were like, you know, like, a lot of the audience isn't going to get that and understand it. And Zhao was actually the thing that is the perfect explanation of how that relationship worked, because I was explaining Zhao to them and why I wanted it in the show and all of that other sort of stuff. I make a lot of Zhao for Thomas's school. And so I like it. And so I wanted it in the show. But they were like, so what is it made of? I was like, well, it's mainly alcohol. And they're like, well, so like it could catch on fire? And I was like, yeah, I guess. And they're like, well, that's how we blow up the thing, and that's how we figure out how to kill these zombies. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, like it catches on fire because, you know, all of the flammable alcohol. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. It gets Zhao on the show. You know, like,
a lot of Zhao for that. Right?
Yeah, it takes a lot of Zhao to do that. And it blows up more like nitroglycerin in the show than it would for if it was just vodka based. But, you know, you know, that's what's great about cartoons.
Yeah. Well, it shows the quality of that Zhao, you know.
That's right. Yeah, I really wanted to get into it. Just as another example, I was like, well, he's in Mexico. Like, what is he would make tequila. Like, they would have agave plants, and so he would make his own personal Zhao, but it would be tequila based as opposed to, and like, I had like wanted to like put that all throughout the show, and it's just like, it's not great storytelling, you know, to put all these little things in there. It's good to have authenticity, right? But you also don't want to make something that's like a lecture on Kung Fu either, right? And so, and that show was such a bouillabaisse of what I grew up watching on UHF TV. It's like grindhouse cinema, Shaw Brothers stuff, you know, horror, all of that sort of stuff put together. And we needed not just authenticity in the Kung Fu, but we needed it in all those places. Like, you know, luckily there was a curandero up here in Austin. We went and visited them and talked to them about, you know, Mexican mysticism. And like, we talked to Dr. Carl Totten, I think, Toten, I can't remember how to, but we went and talked to him about Taoism and making sure that we had that inside of the program the right way too. And so like, you can't just concentrate on your love. You got to spread the authenticity out across everything.
Yeah, you could almost say that's like the fu part of the Kung Fu, right? That it's got to be, you can't if it's just one thing, then it's not really the Kung Fu, right? So to have what would you call it? Like true animation fu, each of those things would have to be covered. Maybe, I don't know. That's
that's how I think of it too. And it's like, you know, there are, just because you know something, like there are parts where, you know, it's not quite the right hand that they have inside of something. You know, an artist will put up a couple fingers as opposed to the one, and you're like, they need to reanimate that scene. But, you know, at the end of the day, does it really matter? I wish we had gotten it in the storyboard process and opposed to after animation. But like, you can't be so dogmatic about that stuff, because at the end of the day, you're supposed to be telling a story, you know, and it's a story that you want to generally. Yeah, exactly.
And if it brings people to the table, you know, that they can go deep, you'll get the message to the right people. You know, I'm a big, you know, as you know, somebody that grew up close to the 80s and stuff like that, I'm a big fan of the slow clap, the acknowledging clap. And when in Seis Manos Silencio's eyebrow started to turn right, I stood up in my living room and I started doing the the slowing down. Yes. They got that was the moment. I was like,
yeah,
good stuff.
that was in there from the very beginning. The first drawing of Silencio had that.
Hello, I'm Sifu Kurtis Fujita with Tiger Crane Kung Fu. I just wanted to let everybody know that we do have an online program that we're utilizing, not just for our enrolled students that come to our physical location, but also for students who are in other states, other time zones, other countries. It's a unique program with multiple components that really help you learn Kung Fu and Tai Chi at home during the current health epidemic and beyond. So we have different components. The first part is, of course, Zoom classes. We have online Zoom classes that meet throughout the week for Kung Fu and Tai Chi. We also have a unique thing which we call our rerun program. And what that means is we record the Zoom classes and we have an archive of dozens and dozens of videos for you to access at any time, anywhere, as long as you have an internet connection. So if you missed a class, you can go ahead and follow along and check it out. Or if you want to remember something that was mentioned in class, you can go back and watch the rerun. It's an archive for all enrolled members. Also, we have personal videos. And what I mean by that is if you film yourself doing an individual technique, you can send it to me and I'll be happy to shoot my own video with a response detailing specifically what you want to do to improve the exercise and do it most efficiently. And lastly, we even have a social club component. And what that essentially means is, when you're at a gym or a martial arts studio, it's that sense of community, the ability to visit with your classmates, with your teacher after class to, socialize. So we have a social club meeting. So once a week after class, we have a Zoom session and we talk for a little bit and catch up with each other and socialize. So these are all the different components that make our unique online Kung Fu program. If you're interested, feel free to reach me at my email address. It's instructor@tigercrane.net. Again, instructor@tigercrane.net. We would love to see you in our online studio. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you, and take care.